This is the story of Martha, a woman of action, strong in faith but easily pulled in every direction. She loved Jesus deeply, but often confused doing for him with being with him. Her story is a reminder that busyness, even when done for good, can pull us away from what matters most, sitting at the feet of Jesus. In Martha's journey, we learn that peace isn't found in having everything in order, but in trusting the one who brings order to everything. It had been raining all night. By morning, the stone path outside the house was slick with water and the hills around Bethany were wrapped in mist. Martha stood by the edge of the courtyard, her hand resting against one of the olive trees her father had planted long ago. The leaves shimmered silver in the breeze. It was quiet, too quiet. For once the house was still. The servants were asleep, no water needed drawing, no travelers at the gate. Even Mary wasn't humming in the back room or dancing through the halls barefoot like she often did. Martha took a deep breath. She hated the silence. To her, stillness felt like something was wrong. If you weren't fixing something, folding something, solving something, what were you even doing? She looked down at her hands, rough from work, fingers always moving, and sighed. God, I don't know how to stop, she whispered. Martha hadn't always been this way. When she was younger, she had been quieter, more curious. She used to ask questions, big questions about life, about heaven, about the Messiah. But when their parents died, things changed. She was the oldest. Responsibility landed on her like a stone. Mary grieved softly, reading Psalms by candlelight. Lazarus took long walks in the hills, pretending he wasn't angry. But Martha, she worked, she swept, cooked, bargained in the market, took over every corner of the household and held it up like a roof ready to collapse. She told herself it was love. Maybe it was. But sometimes she wondered if it was also fear. Fear that if she stopped moving, she might fall apart. And then came Jesus. He had passed through Bethany before, but never like this. Never so near, never into their very home. The first time she heard his voice, she had dropped a jar of flour. It wasn't what he said that startled her, but how he said it, as if every word was wrapped in peace. He didn't speak like the other teachers. He spoke like he knew God, and even stranger, like he was God. Lazarus was instantly drawn to him, Mary too. They began following him from village to village, sitting at his feet, hanging on every word. Martha stayed home. She always stayed home. But now he was coming here, again, to their house. And this time, she didn't want to miss him. But she didn't know how to slow down long enough to sit with him either. She stepped away from the tree and looked down the road. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, sending rays across the muddy stone. In the distance, she saw shapes moving, a small group of travelers making their way toward Bethany. Mary called from the rooftop, "He's here!" Martha's heart jumped. Then, almost out of habit, she turned to run back into the house, but she stopped herself. This time, maybe things could be different. The sun pushed its way through the clouds as Jesus and his followers approached the village. Lazarus spotted them first. "There," he called, waving from the gate. Mary was already halfway down the hill, barefoot and smiling like a child running to greet her father. Martha stood frozen in the doorway, wiping her hands on her robe. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear but out of something more complicated: joy, nervousness, pressure. Jesus was here, and she wanted everything to be perfect. "Peace be on this house," Jesus said as he entered, his voice gentle yet full of authority. Martha stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Welcome, Rabbi." Our home is yours." Jesus smiled. "And yours is full of warmth." Lazarus laughed. "That's mostly Martha. She runs everything." "She always did," Mary added, slipping off her sandals and sitting cross-legged near Jesus. "She used to boss me around when I was 5. Not much has changed." Jesus chuckled. "Every house needs someone who keeps it standing." Martha smiled, but her eyes darted to the empty pitcher in the corner, the tilted cushion, the folded napkins that hadn't been set out yet. "I'll just go check on the meal," she mumbled, retreating before anyone could stop her. In the next room, she stirred the stew, tasting, seasoning, adjusting. She laid out figs, dates, olives, and bread with precision. She refilled water jugs and fluffed pillows, all while listening to the sound of Jesus' voice drifting through the doorway. He was teaching again. Mary laughed at something he said. Martha's hands moved faster. "Doesn't she see how much there is to do?" she muttered under her breath. "There's 12 men in there, plus Jesus, plus Lazarus, and she's just sitting." The stew bubbled over. Martha hissed, jerking the pot off the fire and wiping her hands furiously. "That's it," she said. "I'm saying something." She marched back into the room, brushing flour from her arms, forcing a polite smile. "Rabbi," she said, voice tight, "do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone?" Mary looked up, startled. "Tell her to help me," Martha added, her tone more forceful than she meant it to be. The room went quiet. Jesus turned to her, not angry, not even surprised. His eyes were calm, kind, deep. "Martha, Martha," he said, her name soft and steady. "You are worried and upset about many things." She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. "Only one thing is needed," he continued, "and Mary has chosen what is better. It will not be taken away from her." Silence. Then, gently, he turned back to the others and continued teaching. Martha stood there, stunned. She looked at Mary, who met her gaze, not with smugness, but with love, an invitation. Then Martha looked at Jesus again. He hadn't scolded her. He hadn't said the work was wrong. He had said her worry was. And in that moment, something cracked inside her, something she hadn't even realized she was carrying. She walked back into the kitchen, slowly this time, not to stir, not to scrub, just to sit for a moment. She took off her apron and let herself breathe. The fire still burned. The bread would wait. But Jesus, he was here. And for once, she would stop long enough to listen. The fire in the hearth had burned low. The stew no longer boiled. The bread had cooled. The voices in the next room rose and fell like gentle waves. Jesus teaching, the others laughing, asking questions, soaking in his words. And Martha? She sat in the kitchen doorway, apron folded beside her, elbows on her knees. Her hands, so used to doing, now lay still. She wasn't used to still. She wasn't used to silence. But now, for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't hate it. She could still hear Jesus' words echoing in her heart. "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things." He hadn't said she was wrong to serve. He hadn't said she didn't love him. He just saw what no one else did, how tired she really was inside. All those years of holding everything together, being the strong one, taking care of everyone, and all she wanted was to be seen, to be enough. Footsteps approached. It was Mary. She knelt beside her sister on the floor and rested her head on Martha's shoulder. "I didn't mean to upset you," she whispered. "I know," Martha replied. "I just—" She searched for the right words. "I thought I had to prove something, that if I didn't keep everything perfect, Jesus wouldn't stay." Mary smiled. "He came before the stew was ready." Martha laughed softly. "He didn't he?" They sat in silence for a long moment. "Do you think he'll stay the night?" Martha asked. "I hope so." "I want to ask him something," Martha said, voice lower now. "Not about chores or rules, something real." Mary looked at her with curiosity. "I want to know what he sees when he looks at me." Later that night, as the house quieted and most of the guests found places to sleep, Jesus stepped out into the courtyard alone. He stood beneath the olive tree, looking up at the stars, calm, still, waiting. Martha hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Then, slowly, she stepped outside and joined him. He smiled when she came near. "The stars are bright tonight." "They are," she said. A beat of silence passed. "Rabbi, may I ask you something?" He nodded. "Of course." She looked down at her hands again. "All my life, I've been the one who fixes things. I serve, I clean, I try to make everyone feel safe." She paused. "But sometimes, I don't feel anything." Jesus turned to her gently. "You've carried much, haven't you?" She nodded. "I just want to know. When you look at me, what do you see?" He studied her, eyes full of kindness. "I see a heart that longs to be known, a soul that fights to do what's right. I see strength, yes, but also weariness. And I say to you, Martha, you are loved, not because of what you do, but because you are mine." Martha's eyes stung with tears. He added, "And I'm not here because of your table. I'm here because I love you." She turned away to wipe her face, chuckling through her tears. "Well, I'm still going to feed you tomorrow." He grinned. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The next morning, Martha woke before the rooster crowed. But this time, she didn't jump to her feet or rush to the fire. Instead, she sat on the edge of her mat, letting the soft breeze of the morning brush her face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." And she meant it. By the time the others began to stir, she had already kneaded fresh dough, gathered figs from the tree in the yard, and stirred the coals back to life. But she wasn't rushing. She wasn't proving anything. Today, she was simply preparing a meal for someone she loved. Lazarus padded into the room, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "You're up early." "I always am," she said, smiling. He sniffed the air. "Bread? With honey this time." "Someone's feeling generous." She smiled again and said softly, "I just want to give him my best, without losing myself in the doing." Lazarus gave her a long look. "That sounds new." "It is." When Jesus came into the room later that morning, Martha greeted him, not with urgency, not with flour-covered hands waving orders, but with warmth. "Good morning, Rabbi." "Good morning, Martha," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "The house smells wonderful." She chuckled. "Don't tell Mary, but I added cinnamon." Jesus smiled. "I'll keep your secret." As they sat together for the meal, something was different. The table was simple, but full of joy. No one fidgeted or worried. No one rushed. Even Martha found herself seated longer than usual, listening to Jesus speak. And this time, she didn't just hear him. She listened. Later that afternoon, Mary was outside watering the herbs. Martha sat nearby, weaving cloth on her lap. "You were quiet at lunch," Mary said. "I was thinking." "About what?" "About how much I've missed him." Mary smiled. "You're different." "I hope so," Martha said. "I always thought love meant doing everything right. But maybe love is also slowing down, listening, trusting." She looked toward the house where Jesus was speaking with Lazarus beneath the shade. "I used to serve because I was afraid. Now, I want to serve because I'm grateful." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned a soft orange, Jesus sat with both sisters beneath the olive tree. He told them stories, parables about sheep and seeds, about hidden treasures and tiny mustard seeds that grew into great trees. At one point, Martha asked, "Why do you speak in stories?" Jesus looked at her. "Because stories stay with people, just like hearts stay open when they're loved." She nodded slowly, thinking of her own heart, how it had been closed so long, and how one gentle word had opened it. That night, as the stars came out again, Martha didn't clean the kitchen until it shone. She didn't scrub the floor twice. She sat with Mary, with Jesus, with joy. And when the house was quiet again, she whispered into the night, "Thank you for choosing to come here. Thank you for seeing me." And for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep with peace in her chest and rest in her bones. It had been several months since Jesus last visited Bethany. The house was quieter now. The olive tree had shed most of its leaves, and the air carried a chill that whispered of change. Martha had kept the rhythm going, meals, prayer, work, but something in her had shifted. She no longer lived in a rush. She was learning to breathe, to rest, to leave space for God to move, but even peace can be interrupted. One morning, just before dawn, Mary ran into her room, her voice sharp. "Martha, it's Lazarus! He's burning with fever!" Martha sprang to her feet. She rushed to her brother's side and found him trembling beneath his blanket, face pale, lips dry. "Lazarus," she whispered, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. He didn't answer, only moaned. For 2 days, they tried everything they knew: herbs, oils, rest, prayer. The neighbors brought figs, honey, bitter roots. Martha never left his side, not even to sleep. Mary wept quietly in the corner. Martha kept busy. She cleaned the linens, checked his breathing, ran to the well for water, stirred healing tea with trembling hands. But under all of it, under the movement and the work, there was one thing stirring in her heart. Where is Jesus? On the third day, as Lazarus's breathing grew shallow, Martha stood at the doorway and said, "We must send word." "To Jesus?" Mary asked. "Yes," Martha said. "He will come." Mary's voice cracked. "Will he make it in time?" Martha turned, her face steady but her voice soft. "Even now I believe he can do something." Mary nodded. "I'll find someone to send." The message went out at first light. "Lord, the one you love is sick." That was all it said. It didn't need to say more. Surely Jesus would come. Martha returned to Lazarus's side. She dipped the cloth again, wiped his brow, whispered prayers over and over. But fear had begun to creep in, not loud, not wild, quiet, doubtful. Why hasn't he come? She stood at the doorway later that night, arms crossed, eyes watching the horizon for any movement, every footstep, every rustle of leaves. Nothing. Not yet. Mary approached from behind. "Maybe," Maybe he won't come. Martha turned, eyes flashing. He will. But what if... No. Martha's voice was firm now. He loves Lazarus. He loves us. He will come. Mary looked at her, surprised by her sister's certainty. Even now, Martha whispered again, more to herself than anyone, I believe. But as the sky turned from dark to gray, and the fourth day crept over the hills, Lazarus took his final breath. Neighbors came. Friends wept. The house filled with mourning. Mary curled up on her mat, silent. But Martha? She didn't fall apart. She mourned, yes. She wept. She tore her robe. But somewhere inside she clung to something stronger. Not her busyness, not her plans, but to the presence she still hoped was coming. And though the grave had been sealed, Martha still stood by the road, watching, waiting, believing. The sun beat down hard on the hills outside Bethany, casting long shadows across the path leading toward the village. Martha stood at the edge of the road, dust swirling at her feet. She had barely slept since Lazarus died. She had poured all her energy into funeral preparations, tending to guests, comforting Mary. But nothing, not even her old habit of keeping busy, could quiet the ache in her chest. She had done everything she could. She had believed. She had waited. And still, Jesus hadn't come. Martha! A voice called from the courtyard, one of the neighbors. She turned. It's him, the woman said, breathless. Jesus is here. He's coming down the road. Martha didn't wait. She didn't grab her shawl. She didn't call Mary. She just ran. Her sandals kicked up dust as she bolted through the winding path, heart pounding harder with every step. She didn't know what she would say. She only knew she had to see him. There, just beyond the bend, was Jesus. He stood still, waiting. Their eyes met. And for a moment she didn't feel like the strong one, or the hostess, or the sister with all the answers. She felt like a daughter who had been holding her breath too long. Lord, her voice cracked as she approached, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Tears welled in her eyes. Jesus looked at her, eyes full of compassion, not blame. But even now, Martha added, swallowing hard, I know that whatever you ask of God, He will give you. Jesus nodded slowly. Your brother will rise again. Martha nodded too, but her voice was weary. I know. In the resurrection. On the last day. Jesus stepped closer. He looked into her, not just at her. And then he said something that made the earth feel still. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even if they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Silence hung in the air. Wind rustled the olive trees behind them. Her hands trembled, but her voice, steady, clear, rose from deep inside. Yes, Lord, she said. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And in that moment, her faith wasn't built on what she could see or fix or control. It was built on who he was. Even before he did a single miracle, she didn't ask for proof. She didn't demand an answer. She just believed. I'll go get Mary, Martha whispered. Jesus nodded, and as she walked back down the path, her tears flowed again. But this time, they were mixed with peace. Not because her brother was back, but because she knew who Jesus was, even when he came too late to stop her heartbreak. Martha found Mary sitting on the floor beside the doorway, her face in her hands. "He's here," Martha whispered. Mary looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. Martha nodded gently. "He asked for you." Mary stood, said nothing, and followed her sister. The two women walked together in silence, surrounded by neighbors and mourners who trailed behind them like shadows. But Martha's mind wasn't on the crowd. It was on the way Jesus had looked at her, how he had spoken, not like someone disappointed in her, but like someone inviting her into something deeper. She had always been strong, always steady. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to be either. When they reached Jesus, Mary fell to her knees at his feet. "Lord," she sobbed, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Her words echoed Martha's from earlier. But this time, Jesus didn't respond right away. He looked around. He saw the tears on Mary's face. He saw the brokenness in the mourners. He saw the ache that had settled into Martha's eyes. And then Jesus wept. Not a single word, just tears. The Son of God, standing in the dust of death, crying with the ones he loved, not because he lacked power, not because he didn't know what was coming next, but because he felt what they felt. And in that moment, something shifted in Martha. She had always known Jesus was wise. She had come to believe he was the Messiah, but now she knew he was also near. Not just the miracle worker, not just the teacher, but the friend who stays, who sees, who weeps. One of the mourners whispered, "See how he loved him." Another said, "Couldn't he have healed Lazarus?" Martha stood taller, but said nothing. She had asked those same questions. She had lived in that same ache. But now, she trusted. Even if she didn't understand it all, she trusted the one who cried with her. Then Jesus turned to her. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. Martha pointed toward the tomb. "Come and see." As they walked toward the burial place, Martha stayed close beside him, not as a host, not as a fixer, just as someone who had finally realized she didn't need to do everything. She just needed to walk with him. The tomb stood just beyond the olive grove, carved into the side of a small, rocky hill. It was quiet there, too quiet. The crowd of mourners slowed as they approached, their voices fading into whispers. Mary leaned against Martha as they walked, but Martha's eyes stayed fixed on Jesus. She had believed in him when Lazarus was sick. She had declared her faith in him when he finally came. She had watched him weep with them. But now came the hardest part, letting go. Jesus stood in front of the tomb. A large stone covered the entrance, its surface marked by days of dust and sorrow. Then he turned and looked at Martha and said the words she hadn't expected. "Take away the stone." The world seemed to still around her. Martha blinked. "Lord, it's been 4 days. The smell..." Her voice trailed off. This wasn't about the odor. This was about control. She had spent her whole life making things presentable, respectable, in order. She had cleaned and folded and fixed and organized, and now Jesus was asking her to open what she had already sealed shut, to let him into the one place she couldn't clean, the tomb, the grief, the loss. Jesus stepped closer and looked at her with the same eyes he'd used in the courtyard, the eyes that saw straight into her. "Did I not tell you," he said, "that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Martha's hands trembled. Her heart pounded. This wasn't about dishes anymore. This was about her heart. Could she step aside? Could she trust him? Could she let go of the need to manage everything and just believe? She nodded, slowly, and with that, the stone was rolled away. Silence. Everyone held their breath. The air from the tomb drifted out. Mary gripped Martha's hand, and then Jesus raised his eyes and prayed, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I say this for the sake of those standing here, that they may believe you sent me." Then he raised his voice, "Lazarus, come out!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha clutched Mary's arm, and then movement. A shadow inside the tomb. A figure stepped forward, bound in linen, stumbling, breathing. Lazarus, alive! Martha couldn't speak. She dropped to her knees. Tears spilled from her eyes, not just because her brother had come back from the grave, but because she had to. She had been buried in control, in doing, in distraction. And now she was free. Bethany was never the same after Lazarus walked out of that tomb. People whispered about it everywhere, in the market, on the roads, even in the temple courts. Some came just to see Lazarus with their own eyes, as if needing proof that what they heard was real. But Martha didn't care about the whispers. She only cared about what had changed inside her. It wasn't just that her brother was alive. It was that she was finally living differently. She had spent so many years running, caring, preparing, cleaning, hosting, trying to show love through service and control, and though her intentions were good, her heart had been so tired. But now, she moved more slowly, not with laziness, but with purpose. She still baked bread. She still swept the floors. She still welcomed people in. But the difference was this. She wasn't rushing ahead of Jesus anymore. She was walking with him. One afternoon, as the family prepared for yet another group of visitors coming to see Lazarus, Mary came into the kitchen and asked, "Do you want me to help with the trays?" Martha looked up from slicing figs and smiled. "Yes, but only if you want to. The figs won't judge us if we're a little late." Mary blinked. "Who are you, and what have you done with my sister?" Martha laughed. "I'm still me, just lighter." She looked out the window toward the road where Jesus had walked into their lives again and again. "I used to think being strong meant doing everything right," Martha said. "Now I think real strength is knowing when to stop and sit with him." That evening, they sat around the fire, Martha, Mary, Lazarus, and Jesus. Jesus was quiet, staring into the flames. "Do you remember," Martha said with a soft smile, "when I told you to make Mary help me?" Jesus chuckled. "I do. I think I finally understand why you said what you said." "And what do you understand now?" he asked gently. "That I wasn't wrong to serve," Martha said. "But I was wrong to think service was more important than presence. I was feeding everyone, but starving inside." Jesus looked at her, full of peace. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I serve from love, not from pressure. I still prepare meals, but I leave space for quiet. I still care for others, but I stop to sit at your feet too." She paused. "I've chosen the better part, just like Mary did. And this time, I won't let it be taken from me." Jesus nodded, content. Mary leaned her head on Martha's shoulder. Lazarus, still very much alive, added, "I like this version of you." Martha smiled. "So do I." And for the first time, in a long time, She didn't feel like she had to do anything else. She simply was. It was just days before Passover. Jesus had returned to Bethany one last time, and the whole village buzzed with whispers. The crowds in Jerusalem were growing. Tension was in the air. But in Martha's home, there was peace. She was preparing a supper, not out of stress or fear or duty, but because he was her friend and he was worth everything. The house filled quickly. Jesus, his disciples, others who had followed him closely. Lazarus, now the living testimony of God's power, greeted each guest with a warmth only someone who had tasted death could give. And Martha? She moved through the room like a song, pouring water, serving food, laughing with guests, not 1 ounce of hurry in her steps, not one trace of resentment. She wasn't invisible anymore, not to Jesus, not to herself. She was seen, loved, and exactly where she needed to be. Mary entered quietly from the side room, carrying an alabaster jar. Martha saw her sister kneel at Jesus' feet. She didn't interrupt. She didn't question. She didn't calculate the cost. She simply watched as Mary broke the jar and poured out the perfume, pure nard, filling the house with fragrance. And for the first time, Martha didn't feel jealous or left behind. She felt joy, because worship could be done with oil, or with bread, with perfume, or with peace, with kneeling, or with quiet hands in the kitchen. Jesus looked at Martha from across the room, and she looked back, smiling. She no longer needed to prove anything. She no longer worried about doing enough. She had chosen the better part. And now she knew. The better part was him. The noise in the house faded into the background as Jesus continued speaking about the road ahead, about sacrifice, about love that would go to the cross and beyond. And Martha listened, really listened. Not with one ear while her hands scrambled behind the curtain, not with one foot out the door checking on the stew, but fully, completely present, and in that final supper. Martha's lesson was sealed in her heart. Being with Jesus is the greatest act of love she could ever offer.